is James Taylor, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and Managing Editor of Environment and Climate Change. And yeah, he joins us now. Good morning, James.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, I guess, where are you?
Right now I'm in Reno, Nevada. I'm giving a talk about global warming here this afternoon and showing that the Gore effect gives to all, not just Al Gore. After flying into Reno, temperatures plummeted by 30 or 40 degrees yesterday, and we were at 3 below zero this morning.
3 below zero in Reno?
So I think anytime either Al Gore or myself gives a talk on climate change, on global warming, God's going to show that perhaps we might want to consider the science rather than just rushing into hyperbole.
Tell us about your organization.
Well, the Heartland Institute is a public policy organization, nonprofit. We attempt to identify challenges in society for which free market solutions, market-friendly solutions, can address those issues. And we became involved in the global warming issue because as the environmental activist groups were asserting that we were facing a global warming crisis, their proposed solutions essentially required a massive increase in taxation, a massive increase in government power over energy and our lives, and a massive redistribution of wealth, not just within America, but from America to the very third world nations whose carbon dioxide emissions are rising the fastest. Now, of course, if we were indeed facing a global warming crisis, of course, any amount of money to save the planet from self-destructing would probably be worth it. But we wanted to make sure that if they were going to propose these solutions that would radically restructure our economy in a way that would impoverish most Americans, because the science supported the assertions. And the science does not support the assertions. And just recently, we produced the Climate Change Reconsidered 2 volume, which is over 1,000 pages of the science produced by more than 30 scientists who reviewed the peer-reviewed literature and the raw NASA and NOAA data, showing that humans are not creating a global warming crisis. And you can find that on our website.
Which is?
Heartland.org. And you can just click on Climate Change Reconsidered or NIPCC, N-I-P-C-C, the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change. They're the group of scientists who actually put together the report, and we help distribute it.
So is there man-made global warming or not?
Well, the best evidence seems to be that humans are causing some global warming, but much of the global warming, probably at least half of it, is natural. But that's not even the most important issue, because temperatures have always risen and fallen throughout the ages. And we know, if you look back over the past several thousand years, that today's temperatures are actually colder than what we would normally expect. The only reason that people talk about global warming is because we were in the Little Ice Age from about 1300 to 1900. So the warming that we've had in the past 100 or so years has been warming that has saved us from the famine, the plague, the short growing seasons, etc., of the Little Ice Age. Now, we're having some warming. Humans are probably playing some role in that, but we know that temperatures are still below the long-term average. We know that as warming has occurred, regardless of the percentage caused by humans, we see growing seasons have lengthened, crop production has increased, deserts are shrinking, plant life is expanding, is thriving with more atmospheric carbon dioxide, and we see a decrease in extreme weather events. So the environmental activists want us to believe that any change, especially any change caused by humans, must by definition be bad. But the scientific evidence tells us just the opposite. Humans might be causing a little bit of climate change, a little bit of global warming, but it's not problematic, it's not unprecedented, and the best evidence shows it's beneficial and will likely be so for the foreseeable future.
You know, one of the terms that's thrown around in this debate is greenhouse gases. For those of us who are not specialists in the field, what does that term refer to, and why is it even important?
Well, the Earth's warmth is due to the sun, the solar energy that strikes the Earth, shortwave radiation. After the sun's energy strikes the surface of the Earth, it will then escape into space via long-wave radiation. However, there are certain gases in our atmosphere that will trap that long-wave radiation. It'll allow the short-wave radiation to strike the Earth's surface, but will trap the long-wave radiation from escaping into space. And if we didn't have these greenhouse gases, the Earth would be a frozen place. There would be no life possible on our planet. It's a good thing we have them. So we do know that carbon dioxide is one of those greenhouse gases. As a percentage of our atmosphere, even after this asserted global warming crisis, carbon dioxide comprises 0.04% of our atmosphere. That's up from 0.03% before humans began emitting carbon dioxide. And what we know is that as carbon dioxide it has increased at such a modest level, that likely we're seeing a little bit of warming as a result of that.
And I suppose a question, the follow-up on all this, are the people who are pushing for this, pushing that climate change is one of the great issues, and they even say things like, if you dare to question it, you obviously are an ignoramus. This isn't really then a battle over evidence, is it, as much as it is a kind of an ideological battle?
Exactly. There's a reason why time after time when I'm invited at groups that are putting on that want to have a debate on the topic because it's such a pertinent social, political topic these days, that they cannot get anyone to debate me in these debates. They won't show up because what I do is I produce the evidence. The evidence is produced by NASA satellite data, by National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration data, peer-reviewed studies, etc. That shows that if we're having some warming, it's not a major problem, it's not unprecedented, and it's more beneficial than harmful. And instead, all they want to do is play on people's fears and just shout that anything humans do must be causing a crisis. And if you have the media that is in lockstep with these environmental activist groups, then they're counting on the public not having access to the science and just believing what the media tells them.
You know, I was looking at, you write a regular column for Forbes, and I was looking at your columns, and you won just a few weeks ago with a fascinating title I'd like you to explain to our listeners, Global Warming Activism and Christianity. And then it says, still part of the title, Beware of Modern Inquisitors Toting Bibles. What's that all about?
Yeah, what happens among the various global warming activists is many of them realize that the people who want to see the facts before jumping on board with the redistribution prescription related to global warming, these tend to be conservatives. These tend to be folks who also would be more religious conservatives. Basically, religious conservatives are more likely to be political conservatives. And this really should not be a political issue. It's a scientific issue, but so many folks who enjoy big government, who like redistribution of wealth, will accept the asserted global warming crisis because it allows them an avenue for their prescribed redistribution of wealth. So what they do is they try to say, okay, how are we going to pick off the social and particular religious conservatives? And what they do is they find people who profess to be people of faith, and the people who they single out as these Christian evangelists, most Christians, especially conservative Christians, would have a hard time saying they represent their theological views. These are very liberal interpretations of Scripture and of the Bible, and they come out and say, well, we have a biblical imperative to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, yet they never produced any biblical verses that support that point of view. Certainly man has a stewardship obligation, but any obligation to reduce carbon dioxide emissions is dependent upon the scientific assertion that humans are causing a global warming crisis, and that has not been established. So essentially I pointed out the fact that time and again you see trying to paint this as a religious issue where even conservative Christian leaders are telling us we need to fight global warming, but that's simply not the case. They're taking a few religious leaders out of context, painting them as something they're not, and having them speaking on issues that have nothing to do with religion.
What do you think? We're talking to James M. Taylor. He's with the Heartland Institute, managing editor of Environment and Climate News. What's the website for you guys?
Heartland.org. Very simple.
What do
you can find a lot of this information on my personal website, jamestaylorpolicy.com. I'm putting more of the actual data on my website also.
By the way, what does JD mean?
Juris Doctorate. I have a doctorate in the law.
I've never seen that behind a name before. It says James M.
Because
Taylor.
usually we try to hide that fact.
Oh, okay.
Like
Well, I didn't know. It says James M. Taylor, JD, like MD, and I didn't know what J stood for. Let me ask you this. We're talking about global warming, climate change, those kinds of things, and James has educated us on this because you don't hear global warming mentioned much anymore. You do hear the expression climate change by those who formerly used the expression global warming, but because the globe hasn't been warming in the last decade or so, they don't want to use that terminology anymore. So we've switched to climate change. But the deeper issue here, James, is not necessarily, seems to me, it is the science. We need to look at that and everything. But what is the motivation behind a lot of these folks who are promoting climate change and global warming? And I want to ask you the politics of it, if you will. A lot of folks argue that these are anti-capitalist, and so they want to do something to damage the American economic engine. And so the way you can do that is by scaring people to death, that they're causing the planet to melt. And so we need to have more federal, if not international, regulation of business. And so this is how the socialists / communists ultimately get control of the American economy, is by using something like global warming as a scare tactic because people will do things when they're fearful that they'll give up liberty in the name of security. In this case, they'll give up liberty in the name of protecting the planet from burning up. Do you buy any of that argument about the who's ultimately behind this whole climate change, global warming thing?
That's a good question. It's impossible for any one person to get into the mind of another person and know precisely what they're thinking and what their motivations are. However, participating in this global warming debate for so long, it's become pretty evident to me that there's a broad range of reasons why people believe in and advocate this global warming crisis. And a few of them are people, including scientists, who look at the evidence and genuinely conclude that this increase in carbon dioxide emissions is not only going to raise temperatures but create a crisis. There are others, for example, environmental activist groups, who back 10 years ago, back before Al Gore's movie, back before global warming became a big issue, where they among themselves were having this discussion. Hey, we're losing relevance. The issues that we presented back in the 1970s have either been proven to be false issues or they've been addressed. Now we're losing money. Now we're losing power. How do we regain relevance? And they were talking about how they needed to come up with an environmental issue that was global, and not only global, but was so potentially catastrophic that it would motivate the world to act and then implement their prescribed solutions, which was basically anti-affordable energy, anti-growth, anti-Western civilization. And global warming certainly seems to fit that bill. And regarding the redistribution of wealth and the attacks on capitalism, this is real interesting. At the UN climate talks in Warsaw last month, China led a group of 133 nations that walked out on the talks because they said that the United States and other Western democracies should be paying climate reparations to developing nations. And because the United States, under, of course, President Obama's entourage there, would not commit to giving these reparations until after the midterm elections because they know there'd be election fallout, China led a walkout saying the United States and the Western democracies owe these reparations. But what's real interesting is that China emits more carbon dioxide than any other nation in the world. In fact, twice as much as any other nation in the world. China emits more than the entire Western Hemisphere combined. And Chinese emissions alone are responsible for 75% of the increase in carbon dioxide emissions globally this century. So when China leads a walkout, these nations join them, saying that these Western democracies need to pay them climate reparations. This has nothing to do about climate catastrophes, which, by the way, we know are becoming less frequent and less severe. It has nothing to do with emissions. It has everything to do with nations that are hostile to Western democratic principles and free market economies, wanting to extort money from the Western democracies whose very respect and encouragement of individual freedom is allowing them to live a life that these dictators in the third world have to explain why they're not able to provide these living standards to their own people. It's not about climate. It's about attacking Western civilization.
Mm-hmm. Well, very interesting. I remember reading last year